Yo, welcome everyone. How are you guys doing after that super early Pokemon Direct? I'm in the East Coast, so 9 a.m. was definitely doable, but man, if you were West Coast, having to wake up 6 a.m. just to learn about the new Pokemon games, that's rough, but hopefully it was worth it if you did. You know, after watching it, I've had all day to think about it, react to it, and talk to my friends about Sword and Shield, and I gotta tell you guys, I have a lot of mixed feelings on the Direct, so I want to make this discussion video to get my thoughts out there, and would love for you guys to react to it, challenge me in the comments, and let me know what you guys thought of the Direct, because I think I'm missing something that other fans aren't, and I'd like to try and figure out exactly what that is. I think the best way to discuss the Direct is to go in the same order that Nintendo revealed everything in, so let's start with the trailer. And hey, it was a pretty standard video game trailer. I didn't think there was anything about it that was particularly good. I didn't think there was anything about it that was particularly bad, and that's fine. That's all it needed to be. They didn't really need to accomplish anything more with it. It showed off some nice different locales in the Galar region, some mechanics, and it had a really interesting vocal music piece to it, which is kind of new for Pokemon. But yeah, it was a good trailer, nothing special, and I don't really have any strong opinions on it, to be honest with you guys. I do have some stronger opinions on the next thing they revealed, and that was a couple of the Pokemon that you can find in the new region, and I actually quite liked all of their designs. The Pokemon they showed off were Wooloo, who is a cool little cute sheep guy, Gossifleur, who's a flower that looks to be fire type, Dreadnought, who's a turtle with a strong jaw, and Corviknight, who is a really nice looking raven flying type Pokemon. I thought all 4 Pokemon looked great, and Gossifleur to me was the best one, but I really don't like the second form they showed off of it, Eldegoss, and I'm really hoping that's just a middle evolution because I would love to use Gossifleur on my team, but I was not a fan of Eldegoss, and I hope it still turns into something cool. I'm hoping that this bodes well for the rest of the Pokemon in the Galar region because I thought these 4 were designed way more interestingly than the starters, and if they follow this route, then I think we're going to get a really neat set of Pokemon in this game. After revealing some new Pokemon, Nintendo then showed off the Wild area, which is definitely a new feature and was my personal highlight of the Direct. It's a free roam area where there are overworld Pokemon like Let's Go Pikachu and Let's Go Eevee, which to me is great because I thought that was the best new mechanic that Pokemon has introduced in years. And it has a couple of other free roam design choices where players can essentially go anywhere, look anywhere. It seems like it's different than the traditional route structure, and I think that's a really neat inclusion. I do have a lot of questions on it though, because if you go to the official website, which by the way, if you haven't been to it since the Direct, you probably should because it has a lot of new info that wasn't in the Direct. But the official website states that it connects several different towns. So what I'm wondering is, do players have to go through the Wild area just to get to all of these new towns? Is it something they're going to see 10 times, 15 times? How is that going to really work? And if so, are there other routes to essentially compensate for it? Because I don't know how big the Wild area is. They kept showing the exact same portion of it, but depending on its size, it could either be a chore to go through, or it could be so small that it's like, why do I have to go through this again? How come there wasn't a new route? It's not interesting. So I'm not saying it's a problem by any means. I'm just interested to see how Game Freak and Nintendo implements this area into the game. The only thing I really didn't like about it is that the Direct said that certain Pokemon can only be caught in certain weather conditions, and as a whole concept, that's fine, but the site said that the weather changes every day, which means if you want a specific Pokemon in a certain weather, you have to go back to the Wild area on that day. To me, that means there's going to be a whole lot of checking it constantly just to make sure the weather is right, and we don't even know if it goes in a cycle or if it's random, and it means that Pokemon are time gated, and I don't like that because I wish that we could have access to the Pokemon at pretty much any time. I know Pokemon's done it in the past, but in those cases they were one-off examples like the Lapras in Union Cave in Gold and Silver, but this sounds like it's a whole set of Pokemon that can only be caught on certain days, and I don't know, just the thought of that doesn't jive with me, but depending on how Nintendo implements it, this still could be okay. It's just a concern that I have. Now, there is one thing that I do want to address with the Wild area, and this is more on the fan base's reaction rather than the actual mechanic itself, and that's the player-controlled camera. I think it's absolutely phenomenal that Pokemon finally has a dynamic camera that the player can control. But guys, the way the fan base is reacting, I almost can't believe it. It's 2019. Player-controlled cameras were a thing in 1996 when Mario 64 introduced it. It may have been janky in that game, it may not have worked very well or been implemented very well, but the concept was established 23 years ago. We have been begging Game Freak and Nintendo to put in player-controlled cameras for years now, for several titles, and don't get me wrong, it's great when they do it, but the amount of quote-unquote celebration I've seen online for it is absolutely absurd, because at the end of the day, it sounds like the wild area is the only area that's going to get a dynamic camera and not the rest of the game, so why are we celebrating anything for a feature that should have been introduced into the series 10-15 years ago? I've just been very surprised with the reaction. And look, if you're happy about it because it's ultimately a good gameplay change, that's fine. I'm not going to criticize you, and I'm not criticizing the fan base. I just wish that the Pokemon fan base as a whole would take Game Freak and Nintendo to task more instead of just being blinded by their weaknesses. And look, we all do that because we all have stuff we love. I do that too with a lot of things, but Pokemon has kind of been getting away with a lot of lazy design choices for years, and I just couldn't believe some of the reaction. In fact, I actually asked someone after the direct was over what was the best part of it, and they literally told me it was the dynamic camera, and my head almost exploded because for a dynamic camera to be a selling point, let alone the best thing out of a new game, even when it's only limited to a small section of that new game, that to me was crazy. So for the people who really wanted it, I'm glad you got it. It's a great implementation. I'm very excited for it. I just can't believe how much we're celebrating it. And so that's my personal issue. Not ripping on anyone. It just caught me by surprise. And I wanted to say that because I feel like as a whole, the community would do a lot better to criticize Game Freak and Nintendo rather than to ignore some of the weaknesses they had. And maybe I'm interpreting that wrong, but it's just the thoughts that I initially had, and so I wanted to get them out there. Dynamaxing was a new mechanic that Nintendo showed off right after that, and this is where it started to fall apart for me. I don't get the reason for this inclusion, and I really don't like how Pokemon lately hasn't been addressing the fundamental problems in its design, but instead has been adding gimmicks to pretty much everything, whether it's Mega Evolutions, Z-moves, now this Dynamaxing thing. It's clear that the developers think that there is something they need to do to make the gameplay more interesting, but I feel like they're trying to patch over those holes with band-aids rather than really address the core problems. I was fine with Mega Evolutions in X and Y. I didn't love them. I loved that some of my favorite Pokemon were getting cool new forms, but I didn't love them as a whole as a mechanic. But there was no ill will there either. I hated Z-moves because they were imbalanced, they were overpowered, they were obnoxious to do in the competitive scene because depending on when they were used, a single move could change the entire battle even if you've been working on setting things up. They just weren't for me. I didn't think they brought anything good to the experience, and this kind of feels like another attempt at doing something like that. For me, the reason why I don't see the Dynamaxing mechanic as interesting is because I'm not sure anything is actually changing, if that makes any sense at all. Dynamaxing makes a Pokemon significantly larger in size, it makes them stronger, and it changes all of their current moves to a different version of those moves. But if two Pokemon are Dynamaxed at the same time, the gameplay itself hasn't actually changed because they both get the stat buffs, they both get the new moves. The only thing that's changed is the visuals on the battlefield, and for some people they're going to find that more interesting. I personally don't, but it seems like a gimmick that was basically lazy and not really well thought out. There will definitely be scenarios, don't get me wrong, where a Dynamaxed Pokemon is going against a not Dynamaxed Pokemon, but to me, that just feels cheap in a way. Like, it just feels tacked on. It doesn't feel solid. It doesn't feel like it's aiding the core battling gameplay in any way. And I gotta tell you, competitively, I think it kind of concerns me because the Dynamaxing lasts 3 turns, and if you have an opponent that is Dynamaxed, why would you just not run Protect teams to stall them out? Constantly using Protect to wear down those turns seems like the best strategy, at least at first, and of course that's subject to change, but I don't know. if someone could explain this to me better, that would be awesome, because I'm not necessarily sure anything is changing but the visuals, and even if it does, it seems to promote stalling in the competitive scene, and I don't know, maybe they intended it to be, you know, like quote-unquote boss fights in the main story. I'm not sure, but I don't know, I didn't like it, and I think this is the thing that the internet is reacting to the most negatively, but you guys let me know what you think, because I can't really put my finger on it, but something seems really, really off about it. The only real positive from the Dynamaxing mechanic, in my opinion, was the raid battles, which were shown off next. I think it's awesome how the main story part of the game now has some real multiplayer aspects. I know me and my friends are looking forward to doing those raid battles. We're looking forward to taking down some Pokemon, but I kind of wish that's all Dynamaxing was for, and so we'll have to see how this plays out, but I'm actually very excited for this. I think it's a really cool addition. It doesn't seem like it's really going to affect the main story negatively in any ways. It's just another way to play with friends, and I think Nintendo nailed it out of the park on that, so that's one of the features I'm really, really excited for. There were two other things that Nintendo showed off, and the next one was gym battles, and I gotta tell you, I was really hoping that they would change the formula here, but I wasn't expecting it, so I don't really know how to feel about it. In my personal opinion, the current structure of gyms is the worst thing about the Pokemon series, and allow me to explain that. For inexperienced players, I get why they do the every gym is one type system. It helps players learn the type advantages and disadvantages. It means that you can't really be roadblocked by them because you can always figure out who to use if you know the type system, and it's really simple to understand. But for experienced players such as myself, what I find the experience to be is find a Pokemon whose type advantage you have, find a move whose type advantage you have, and mash the hell out of the A button as quick as possible just to end the battle. And maybe that's a little bit harsh, but I can't think of any time in the more recent Pokemon games where I just wasn't using the same move or moves over and over and over again. And it just feels like there's very little strategy in gym battles, and I'm not sure that the benefit for teaching users the type system is enough to not consider redoing it all, because I think you can teach users the type system in a different way. To me, the solution has always been so obvious. It's give every gym leader diverse teams. And the reason I like that is because not only does it mean your team has to be diverse in both types and movesets, because you need to counter them, it means that there will be actual switching in battles. It means that you're forced to catch Pokemon more, which I also think is kind of a forgotten aspect of Pokemon until Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, but that's a discussion for another day. And it actually means you have to somewhat master the type system rather than just comprehend it. It makes battles more dynamic, it makes them more interesting, and you never know what a gym leader will have, so there's an actual risk to fighting them the first time. And it's such an obvious solution, I don't understand why Nintendo won't embrace anything like that. Like I said, I wasn't expecting them to do any sweeping changes like that, but when they showed off the grass gym leader, I think his name was Milo, I could be totally wrong, I didn't look it up before this, I'm sorry. But when they showed off the gym leader, it's like, great. Now we're just gonna have to select the same move again, over and over and over again. At least this time they've wrapped it up in some awesome visual flair. I think the stadium setting is perfect. I think having the big crowds there is actually exciting, but I'm just worried that those visual flares are kind of masking a more fundamental problem. And given that this is the first, Pokemon game for a home console, granted I get that the Switch is a hybrid, but there's a home component to it, I was hoping we would see a real shakeup here, kind of like the wild area that they went over earlier. I was a little bit bummed out when none of that happened. I think this is the part I'm missing compared to the Pokemon fanbase, because if you want your Pokemon to be the exact same as it has been in the series past, then this trailer would blow you away. But for me personally, I skipped Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, had no interest in those. I only got a third of the way through Sun and Moon. X and Y left a good impression, but not a great one. Black and White, Platinum, all that kind of stuff left no impression, other than, they were good Pokemon games, but that's it. I don't know, I just feel like the series is so overdue for a change, and that's probably on me because I think I'm getting a little bored with it, but, hey, I remember the reaction to Ultra Sun and Moon. It sold very well, but the initial reaction was pretty negative, and I just feel like the Pokemon series really needs to mature with some sweeping changes because, yeah, the gameplay is tried and true, but it's not evolved. And when other series don't do that, they get put to task. Pokemon really doesn't. And I think the solutions are so simple, and I could go into a whole bunch more too. But I think the solutions are so simple that I was really hoping that there would be something different to the overall game structure, kind of like how Let's Go Pikachu and Let's Go Eevee did the overworld Pokemon. That, to me, was so refreshing. I know it's an unpopular opinion. I actually think Let's Go were the best pair of games in years, casually or hardcore. I've played every Pokemon game, so I think I'm a hardcore player. I mean, some of them I've beaten 5, 6, 7 times, full playthroughs. But yeah, I actually think Let's Go are two of the better Pokemon games because they didn't do everything perfect. They absolutely did not. But they at least tried something different, and the experience as a whole felt different. And in one way, I kind of feel like this is regressing a little bit. And that's probably just me, but I wanted to throw it out there because I want to know how you guys feel about that, because even though the other stuff is cool and there's new features, when it came down to showing the core gameplay, everything was the same as it was before. And I think I'm reacting a little bit more negatively than most of the fan base to that, and I would love to know what you guys think of it. And then lastly, they showed the legendaries. I'll be honest with you guys, I have no interest in either of these. It looks like they started with Solgaleo as a design and worked off there. They came across as lazy. I don't like how similar they are. I have a horrible feeling they're going to do something like forms or merging them together to form an ultimate one. I usually don't care for that in Pokemon, but they're legendaries. I never use them on my team anyways. I'm sure some people will find them more interesting than me. That's just a personal thing with these two guys. There's nothing actually objectively wrong with them. I just wasn't the biggest fan of them. So yeah, that's my thoughts on the Pokemon Direct. It seems like it is a standard title in the mainline Pokemon series, and you know, that's just it for me. It's standard. As a kid, I loved standard because it was new at the time. It was exciting, and I was young, and it was really easy to digest, and it was fun. As I've gotten older, that standard really hasn't evolved with me, or to be honest, I don't think it's really evolved with the industry as a whole. And now that we're 8 generations in, is it 8? Is it 9? No, it's 8. But now that we're 8 generations in, I just wish that Game Freak and Nintendo would feel comfortable not doing something standard, really taking a risk, really trying to elevate the gameplay. And so I think I'm a little bit bummed out that this just appears to be standard. I think that's the best way for me to sum it up. So I would rate this Direct probably a 7 out of 10 in terms of my expectations, because I didn't really have any. I think it did what it needed to do. It wasn't perfect, but it was good. My hype for the game is more 3 out of 4 to 10. I'll try it because all my friends are Pokemon diehards. You know, I've always been a Pokemon diehard, even though that's been waning in the last few years, and I still want to try it because it's really the first HD game, the first game that you can play on a home console. And hey, my girlfriend loves Pokemon. She just completed her first one in Let's Go Pikachu and Let's Go Eevee, so I have a lot of other reasons to play it. But as a game, I hate to say it, it looks kind of mediocre. Even amongst Pokemon games, I'm not sure it's going to rank up there, and obviously we'll know after we play. This is just first impressions from a game I haven't touched, but yeah, it looks average, and I hate to say that because so many series have been pushed to their limits on the Switch, and I think this would have been the perfect time for Game Freak to do the same thing, and they didn't. So maybe my hopes were misplaced. I think they were. I own that. But you guys let me know what you think. Comments, Twitter, however you want to do it. I really want to know your guys' opinion because I would love to just get a better read on the fan base, and I just like interacting with you guys. So let me know, and I will see you next time for, I don't know, probably an E3 reaction. Probably not the next season of Design Bites because I still have some work to do on that. But yeah, I will see you guys next time for another video at some point, and I hope that you guys got more out of the Pokemon Direct than I did. Thanks, everyone.